Hey, what's going on, guys, and welcome back. So today's video is actually inspired and sort of a quasi response / discussion video to another video uploaded by content creator Adam Millard on YouTube. This video was brought up to me by user Arrow in our Discord server, and it dives into 4 specific monster taming games, being Coromon, Nexomon, Temtem, and Monster Crown. Now, the video itself is titled How Nostalgia is Holding Games Back, and it's actually quite a good watch. I will leave it linked below. However, I do want to push back on some of the critiques made by him regarding the monster taming games in question. This isn't some sort of drama video. I actually really did enjoy the video, and it brought up a lot of good points, especially regarding the distinction between good nostalgia and bad nostalgia, and it was extremely well put together. That said, I do think it did miss the mark on a few points, especially regarding the monster taming games. He also talked about Sekiro, which is one of my favorite FromSoft games, and critiqued the skill and weapon system, which I disagree with in part, but that's a topic for another day. Anyways, all that said, let's go over the points that I want to discuss here. And again, please watch the full video for its context, as it's 22 minutes long and I will be skipping around to the specific monster taming related sections. If you have anything to add in the comments below, definitely feel free to, and I'm going to do my absolute best as possible to make sure none of the points made in the video are misconstrued or misrepresented. Hence why I really urge everybody to watch the original, and hell, subscribe to him if you enjoyed it. That said, let's dive into the first segment.
In many ways, nostalgia is our gateway to the past, allowing us to relive our most cherished memories, whilst also adding to them with new experiences from the present. Nostalgia's great, right? Well, we certainly like to remember it that way, don't we? Most discussions of nostalgia in media begin and end with that sort of surface level sentimentality. But I think that nostalgia is more than just fondly remembering something you liked when you were younger. So often when we talk about this topic, we ironically, get so bogged down in reliving our own memories that we forget to take a look at the way nostalgia itself can both enhance and harm the ways in which we engage with video games as a medium.
Okay, so I did want to include this first little bit as it gives context to the part after. Basically, Adam goes over the idea that nostalgia can be both a good and bad thing depending on how it's executed. I think we're going to disagree on certain executions of nostalgia, but for me, a good example of utilizing nostalgia is something like Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green or Heart Gold Soul Silver, where you take a game that already exists and enhance it. Now, this is just one example when it comes to remakes specifically. You could have something like the castle in Mario Odyssey, which is a throwback to Mario 64, or even Breath of the Wild, including old areas that were sort of post-apocalyptic like Lon Lon Ranch. I think these are ideas of good nostalgia. Bad nostalgia, in my opinion, is surface level pandering like Pokemon BDSP that adds little to nothing new to the games and just serves it up with a new coat of paint, or the Mario 3D All-Stars, which are just basically simple ports priced similarly to a full new game. But that is subjective to an extent, but I think you guys understand what I'm trying to say. Like, there's definitely a distinction to be made.
I first really began to notice this when I went back and got my teeth stuck into a group of games that have made waves recently that are all trying to capitalize on nostalgia for Pokemon. Look at Temtem, Coromon, Nexomon, and Monster Crown. The influence is obvious, and these games do a great job of replicating the flavour of the various different eras of Pokemon. Coromon takes big influence from the GBA games, Monster Crown has a chunky Game Boy aesthetic. You get the picture.
Other than using the phrase capitalizing on nostalgia, as I feel like it gives off the vibe that the games are trying to weaponize nostalgia to gain nothing more than capital, rather than the devs just being avid Pokemon fans who want to make something similar but also unique or improved. I don't have any issues with what was said, and I could just be looking into the exact phrase he's using a little too much. I don't think he meant to say that, but I just wanted to point that out.
However, even though these games are great at replicating the feel of Pokemon, and at times improving on the series' boring battle system and anti-consumer splitting the game in two thing they've always done, I still couldn't really get into any of them. I really enjoyed getting to experience my love of Pokemon all over again from a new point of view, but in spite of their objective improvements, I dropped all 4 of these games just a few hours in.
Okay, so before we dive into more here, I do want to say that this is a very subjective take, as I could easily sit here and say that I've put hundreds of hours into these games and did not fall off despite the clear inspiration and similarities to Pokemon. Each game brings forth its own unique aspects to the table, some obviously more than others, but nonetheless, these games have something valuable level for different types of Pokemon fans. Coromon has its unique potential system, combining essentially what is a streamlined version of IVs with the shiny system. Nexomon has its awesome story-driven narrative that pushes the plot instead of being more like a fetch quest to collect badges with story as a secondary. Temtem has its MMO elements, non-RNG battle system, full double battles and co-op, and Monster Crown is almost not even like a Pokemon-like, with it having a very unique battle system that focuses on synergy, mid-battle transformations. It also has fusions, crossbreeds, a semi-open world, and more. A lot of individuals' specific enjoyment of any given monster taming, or in this case Pokemon-like specifically, game will come from what they specifically want from a Pokemon game. There are so many different types of fans, so what you might have seen as bad or bland, another person might put hundreds of hours into it. So obviously that's going into the realm of subjectivity, but I still reject the idea that these games are held back by their similarities to Pokemon, because Coromon, Nexomon, and Temtem are some of the most successful games in the genre when it comes to the indie scene because of these similarities. And hey, I love games like Monster Sanctuary, and I'm really looking forward to Cassette Beasts, both of which are unique monster taming experiences unlike Pokemon. And while their unique concepts are awesome, I don't think that other Pokemon-like games are held back by being Pokemon-like, because in reality, they're actually loved for taking what people already enjoyed and putting a creative spin on it and enhancing it.
Why? Well, to put things simply, I think that Coromon, Temtem, and all the other games that try to capitalize on throwbacks to retro Pokemon were so consumed with their own nostalgia for their inspiration that they not only forget to have their own identity, but they also lose sight of what made the original games good, fun, and memorable to begin with.
So again, I've already briefly touched on what makes each game unique and creative, and honestly this seems like a very surface level analysis of these games when there's so much more to them than just being like Pokemon. Even with the feel comparison to Lapras here, I don't think it's fair, because a lot of Pokemon's designs, firstly, were taken in part from Dragon Quest V, and a lot of monster ideas would have already just been explored because Pokemon has almost 1,000 creatures. So there's always going to be overlap, especially in this genre where there's hundreds of unique creatures between games. I think hyper-focusing on the one monster based on the Loch Ness Monster, while not looking at all the unique designs that Monster Crown has, is a little unfair in my opinion.
Essentially, what I'm talking about is the idea that nostalgia is a double-edged sword. I'll get back to these Pokemon knockoff games later.
I agree that nostalgia is a double-edged sword, specifically in the examples that I mentioned way back at the beginning of this video, but again, I don't see that as the case here. Furthermore, calling these games knockoffs implies that they're either stealing copyright or they're not legitimate, which isn't the case at all, and just perpetuates this disillusion that Pokemon is the first monster taming game when titles like Dragon Quest V, DDS Megami Tensei, Cosmic Soldier, and more existed prior to it. So I could almost turn around and call Pokemon a knockoff of those games, because back then, the idea of using monsters in a turn-based format would have been considered something unique to the titles before it. It almost goes back to the whole every first-person shooter is a Doom clone type thing. Next, he goes on to make some very good points of other inspired games, not in the monster taming genre, but just other games in general, only taking what at a surface level is the main nostalgic aspect of their influences, and then discusses how he believes these hold games back because essentially they pigeonhole themselves into following a formula already created for them and not really caring over the less in-your-face reasons why some of these games are successful. And when these games are recreated in many ways, don't end up living up to the nostalgia, because the nostalgia itself is heavily altered in our minds. He brings up games inspired by Doom and even Banjo-Kazooie that very closely follow the original design philosophies but are ridiculed despite their inspirations for having similar features, not experiencing the same issues. Again, check this video out because we're going to be skipping forward quite a bit here.
Instead of building on existing nostalgia, many games opt for the much easier technique of just sort of reheating the same stuff you recognize already and serving it to you again for a quick, cheap burst of, "Oh yeah, I recognize that," and not much else.
Again, I could tell you didn't play much of these games if this is the conclusion you came to, because other than the base game that looks and plays like Pokemon, with Coromon, you're missing the Zelda inspiration, the Final Fantasy inspiration, and more. There's also a lot of stuff in Coromon that no Pokemon game has ever even attempted, so saying it's not much more is really misled in my opinion.
To show you what I mean, let's go back to those Pokemon-inspired games I mentioned earlier. All of them are just bursting at the seams with Pokemon references. From the way that the not Pokemon centers look, to your choice of 3 starter creatures, even to very specific stuff like the way the Catching Monsters animation has this 3-step confirmation before finally resolving.
So in this case, you're looking at the very basic fundamental Pokemon-like aspects to the games, but not looking much further. You showed off custom mode, that Coromon has to offer, for example, earlier on in the video, which, by the way, Nexomon and Monster Crown also feature a different variant too, if you weren't aware. There's also a lot more than that goes to each of these games. And also, this is not a healing center in Monster Crown, this is a shop.
It's impossible not to be reminded of Pokemon while playing these games.
Okay, so this is definitely true, but it's not a bad thing, and Monster Taming games are in a very unique position, which I will discuss towards the end of the video, which isn't accounted for here.
And don't get me wrong, this can be fun, but it also sets up a dangerous precedent. Namely, that players can get more attached to having their nostalgia catered to than the actual game underneath. Meaning that when these clones dare try and step out from Pokemon Shadow, that break in such a powerful nostalgic illusion creates one hell of a whiplash effect.
I actually think that the opposite is true. People use Pokemon's nostalgia as a way to essentially crap on other Monster Taming games that are either like it or not even like it. For example, many Pokemon fans lament about how other games have bad designs and Pokemon has the best, which obviously is biased, and from the different games whose rosters I've explored extensively, just isn't the case. Every game has stinkers, every game has awesome designs, every game has middling designs, but in reality, a lot of people say Pokemon has the best designs because it's what they grew up with. That's why we see a lot of people who play ROM hacks or fan games that won't even play Pokemon likes, even if these fan games or ROM hacks have Fakemon. To even further perpetuate this point, there are games like Monster Sanctuary, as mentioned previously, that are nothing like Pokemon other than being RPGs and having creatures to battle with. And I think if you played this, Adam, you'd say, well, this is a good example of not setting up those expectations and whatnot. You'll still see a ton of people calling it a Pokemon clone, or a knockoff, or a ripoff. So I don't see the difference in reception from that side of the community when it comes to Pokemon likes or non-Pokemon likes within the genre.
Both Nexomon and Coromon, for example, vastly simplify Pokemon's typing system, having both fewer types in general and removing dual-type monsters. Objectively speaking, this is very sensible, because it removes the weird redundancy Pokemon has, and it makes balancing quite a lot easier. But I was being reminded so often about how much I like Pokemon, that it just made me nostalgic for the way those games work, and how much I like dual types as a concept, rather than endearing me to the game I was actually playing.
So this is just a case of you comparing it with another game in the genre. Obviously, the inspiration is the case, and yeah, dual types are awesome. That's not really a nostalgic take in my opinion. A lot of people would love to see dual types in these games because they mix up the battle system, allowing more monsters to not feel same-ish. It's not just because it's how it is in Pokemon, it's just better in my opinion. Dual types, in my opinion, are actually the objectively better system than monotypes when it comes to a Pokemon-like system, and I think the reason Pokemon has dual types to begin with in the first generation is because they realize this as well.
The same goes for Temtem's grinding. It would be a mild niggle in any other RPG, but because Pokemon specifically is easy enough to almost never require grinding, it brings the necessity of slaughtering wild creatures to level up into frustrating focus, even though Pokemon being too easy is a constant complaint with that series. Yeah, see what I mean about nostalgia warping the way we remember things?
So no, in this case, Temtem is very grindy. It's not just because Pokemon you're more nostalgic for or it's too easy or whatever. They've added more SVs and TVs, which are IV and EV equivalents. The game's having 50 for 7 stats instead of 31 for 6, and then having 1,000 TVs instead of 510. You also have a myriad of unskippable trainer battles, and early on in the game, stamina management is a real slog because a lot of moves will use up almost all of your stamina in one go. This same issue doesn't exist with the other 3 games you mentioned. This is a Temtem specific issue, and the community and devs have acknowledged that the game is very grindy.
Getting to see a contextless reference to the past can feel affirming and engaging, but the high never lasts long and will only make you more hungry for your nostalgia fix in the long run, because the emotional basis to that nostalgia isn't actually being satisfied. The problem with these Pokemon successors is that they burn you out on comparisons to their inspiration long before you can get attached to the perfectly good game they actually are.
This is a good point, again, depending on the game. I never felt burnt out with any of these Monster Taming games, but I have seen the burnout argument used against Temtem specifically for my aforementioned reasons.
Of course, this isn't to say that just referencing stuff people are familiar with is always bad. That's ridiculous. Basically, all memes, and depending on how pretentious you want to get, all humor, is based on recognizing references and getting that little chemical reward for doing so, and games are no different. It doesn't have any deeper meaning or appeal when cute old-timey Pixel Mario pops up for these 2D sections in Odyssey, or when Final Fantasy pulls yet another Moogle out of its backside, but it's still fun to see them again. However, there's still an important distinction to be made between giving someone a satisfying experience that builds on what they love already and just endlessly rehashing the same ideas.
So again, I do feel like the Pokemon-like games you've mentioned do in fact build on the foundation created by Pokemon and are not just simple one-to-ones. So now I'm gonna take the next sort of section of this video to explain the situation within the genre, especially when it comes to Pokemon, because Pokemon and games like it can't really be compared to, let's say, platformers or first-person shooters. There's a really unique context. So the monster taming genre for the longest time was basically a Pokemon jerk-off session. Nothing stood even close to Pokemon, and it's been by far the uncontested king for the last 25 years. When you look at platformers, sure, Mario is also the undisputed king, you could say, but you have tons of alternatives. Same goes for pretty much any genre of game. With monster taming games, for a long time, you did not have a whole lot of options, especially if you're more of an adventure-oriented monster taming fan that likes turn-based combat. Games like Monster Rancher, for example, focus on menu-based raising and real-time combat rather than adventuring. Other titles have been smeared, like Telefang, being marketed as a Pokemon bootleg in the form of Diamond and Jade and was never actually localized to begin with, just like games like Devil Children, most Metabots games, a ton of Digimon games, and even a lot of Dragon Quest monster titles in recent times that are not making their way to the West. Look at Yokai Watch that did come to the West. It's leaving, and it was a completely unique concept, but got labeled and bashed as a Pokemon clone by ravenous Pokemon fans that will attack anything they deem a threat. Now Yokai Watch is not coming back to the West, so that's another alternative that's basically gone. This obviously isn't the entire Pokemon community, but it is and has always been a notable margin. That said, Pokemon has been the only source of this type of game for so long, and honestly, many of us were fine with it for a while. Unfortunately, people grew up and Pokemon has also started to lean more towards a casualization of many of its aspects, which have led people like myself to want more from a Pokemon game. This is what birthed the success of games like Coromon, Nexomon, Temtem, Monster Crown, etc., because a lot of us can't get the experience we want from a Pokemon game, but these games deliver in certain aspects. Does nostalgia hold these games back in some regards? Yes, I'd say that the nostalgia from Pokemon fans that are unwilling to try anything new is what holds them back. But then again, the familiarity is what convinces some of those people to actually try these new games, and if it wasn't different enough, at the very least, they can aid in acting as a gateway to more non-traditional monster taming games like Monster Sanctuary or Cassette Beasts or Disc Creatures or whatever. I understand a lot of the points that Adam makes in his video, and I do not fault him for not knowing the nuances within the monster taming genre, especially as it pertains to Pokemon-like titles, because unless you're constantly living and breathing within this niche, it's easy to assume it's like any other. To me, Pokemon-like games are an homage to what we love about Pokemon, but also give us an outlet to enjoy certain things that Pokemon will never do, because in some ways, the franchise has gotten a little too big for its own good. Experimentation is generally not really liked with big franchises. I mean, look at Call of Duty and FIFA. But yeah, you want a game with Pokemon Fusion? I doubt that's gonna happen. That's a lot of work, it's a lot of experimentation, but Monster Crown has a bunch of unique features alongside a fusion mechanic, so there is something for Pokemon fans that want something like that to enjoy. It doesn't mean that the game is any worse for having a nostalgic base. It just means that, again, it's an homage to something we already love. Same goes for Coromon and its dungeon elements, which are actually somewhat reminiscent of Zelda, or Nexomon with its great story, or even Temtem with it having MMO elements. In my opinion, games inspired directly from Pokemon within the genre as of right now do in fact fall under Adam's definition of good nostalgia, because they do build on what Pokemon is and what Pokemon should be, at least from the particular perspective of certain sub-niches within Pokemon itself. Pokemon fans are super diverse. Some love lore, some want PvP, some want to play through the story, others want to explore, we have those that want to catch everything, etc. You might be the type of fan who looks for something that these games don't deliver, but for many, these games hit hard for those that wanted something different from Pokemon that keeps what makes it great. And there you go, guys, a very long-winded response video to Adam Millard, whom again will be linked below. Definitely check him out. His video made a ton of good points, and I want everybody to have absolute context for my response. That said, if you are new to the channel and want to learn more about monster taming games, whether they be turn-based RPGs, real-time combat, 2D, 3D, Monster Taming platformers, or even just Pokemon stuff, whatever. Definitely subscribe to my channel as I put out new videos every single day. You can also check out my Twitter, my Discord, support me on Patreon, all links below. Special thanks to our patrons, especially the top tier backers being Dro Ghost, Jim Hamilton, Dark Persona, and Steel Case. And with that, we'll see you guys next time. Peace.